Yeah, the time.
Oh, hold on. No, we're on. We're good. We're good. I just switched this over. Okay. Good afternoon. This is the October 16th, 2023 meeting of the Riverfront Advisory Committee. Open the floor up for public comment. Seeing no members of the public, we'll continue with the rest of the agenda. We do have a set of meeting minutes for approval from the August 21st, thank you, meeting. Did anyone get a chance to review that? I think Joe had sent them out probably in August, not long after we had met, right?
I don't have clear memory of it, but I did review them.
I reviewed them at the time, and I didn't.
Nothing jumped out.
Nothing jumped at me either.
Yeah, I did as well. So.
Will those be posted on the website?
I think they usually have been posting
They do
them.
want to send them to Wendy.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not.
Yep, they usually get put.
Okay.
The best at it right now.
Okay.
They usually get put on the website, but that is actually, I think, we have not had any formal meetings since June, because we did not meet in July or September. So it'd be June, then to August 21st, and then to today. So I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as Joe had written them. All in favor?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Cool.
And you're abstaining? Or?
I'm abstaining because I wasn't here.
You were not on the committee at the time, which makes sense.
Yeah.
So starting with new business, 3A, welcome Betsy.
Thank you.
Betsy has attended a few of our meetings, offered some very good input to date, and has now filled our open vacancy and can be formally part of the conversation. So
Thank
welcome
you.
aboard.
Thank you.
So I'm just looking at the agenda. Lindsay, do you want me to jump to you to the item that we had to talk about, or are you okay hanging around for a few minutes?
I don't mind hanging around.
Okay. I didn't know if you had to kind of get out of here. I can scramble this a bit. So item 3B, this was something that I think we've kind of chatted with extremely high level and just various side conversations, but I think kind of start bringing it up in a little bit more formal context in an actual planned meeting at this point. But we have been, I guess, sort of discussing the concept of the river walk and potentially using it as the backbone for like starting a community trail network. I think the conversations in the past have centered around, well, most people walk over other recreation activities, and most people don't always know where everything is in the town, especially if they're not from here, if people are visiting us from Durham or Stratham or other communities. And starting to potentially, if people like the idea, start laying out a blueprint for a community trail, which shows people how to get from point A to point B. So one of the things I think we had mentioned or discussed is, can we use that as a potential to connect Shanda Park over to Heron Point by just some signage or a couple decals on the sidewalk or whatever that show people how you get there. Because there is a path that exists, if you want to walk from the park through the mills over by Bryant Rock, is that what it is? Bridge to Bryant Rock, Bay Road, and then down into the Heron Point property.
Yeah, and that's certainly a lot more attractive since the sidewalks went down.
Yeah, exactly. So that.
And the conversation, there were no sidewalks, but with the sidewalks, it's markedly improved.
It really is. So it seemed like, maybe that's a concept of how we can kind of start something, but I think the question from there that maybe, again, for town staff down the line too, maybe more of a Bart question. I did mention this to him for all of 2 minutes last week. But if it's successful, people like the concept, then you could start bringing it in, this way to the library, this way to the rec department, a business could say it, come get ice cream, head this way. Like, just something that allows people to know a little bit more. I mean, people have their phones, but there's still something tangible about just seeing a sign or a decal or an arrow or whatever that just says, hey, go check this out if you're interested.
And I like the idea of the historical buildings around the community.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can merge that with some sort of a QR code sort of a thing so that there's different stop points and people can connect with their phone. I think, when you have that connectivity, it definitely is very appealing for a lot of people. It gives a little history and, maybe even suggests the next route for them to go. So.
It seems like there's a lot of potential with it. I mean, I don't think there's necessarily anything that we're voting on or recommending today. I think it's probably try to discuss in a little bit more detail with Bart at a future time when he can come in. I see his support as being fairly important to supporting something like that, but it also might be kind of that first thing of, well, is there anything that really prevents us from making a recommendation that gets considered or something? So.
Yeah, when I think of the community trail concept, wasn't part of what Barton wanted to have discussed with the charrette was ways of making sure, he wanted connectivity like between Newmarket,
Yeah.
our recreational areas, our walking trails with Durham walking trails, which there are, I get all trails, I have a membership to that, and you can see from the ones, that there is already connectivity up into Durham, on that trail that's over there, and I've never walked that part of the trail, and you've got the Sweet Trail, which is connections with Durham, so, it'd be, when I first saw this on the agenda, I thought that's where you might be going with that, is how do some of these, the signage now over at Slippery Rock talking about the different access points. I think that would be when he does the charrette about the riverfront, thinking in terms of how does it fit in with the other trails that we have, and that's kind of in that mix too. I guess it's not a better place to mention it. This is that I was we did a walk on Pierce Island recently, and it was the first time I had done that walk around the entire end of the island since they put up the fence separating the sewer plant from the water. And I guess it would be different for us, but I wondered if there's anything in that model that could work if we wanted to have more of a walking trail concept, we got down to the Fish and Game landing and back up around. I don't know if that makes that any more attractive or less attractive or anything, but I thought at least there's an example that somebody has done something similar.
And the concept too, similar to the Freedom Trail in Boston, where you actually have, a marked way that would lead you in a particular direction, I think is also, can be explored.
Yeah, I kind of liked that idea. I mean, obviously the scale of Newmarket is different than Boston, but something that was okay, this is intentional, not just someone stuck a random sign in the corner and said, visit whatever.
And the Black Heritage Trail New England might be interested in looking at, I just heard this morning on NPR, they were doing a nonprofit, and they talked about Cheswell being the first elected black official in New England, and so some markers around where he was, and they might be interested in that, and looking at the connection between the mills in New England and the cotton production in the South, and how that connected. So they might be another source of looking at.
Betsy's comment about QR codes too. It seems like a lot, we've talked before, I haven't looked lately, but it seems like when I've looked in the past, we still have made a lot of progress in terms of maps and doing it on the kiosks.
Yeah, the kiosk.
You know, like the sliding rock kiosk.
That's been a big part of the Concom, is we've been working on standardizing a lot of it, trying to make it look similar. If you're showing up, the sign to the property looks similar, the kiosk maps look similar, things like that.
And is there much work going on at Concom? I wouldn't be surprised if there were, to try to get those maps on the web, because a lot of towns have done a lot with that.
Yeah.
I think we've mentioned it before.
It's been slow, but definitely something that's being discussed. And I guess the other angle, so I actually finally did get to go to Heron Point on Sunday. Jeez, was that on yesterday? So I went there yesterday, and that's the first time I'd actually been on the property since the Conservation Commission had done a lot of the improvements late last fall, and I think a little bit into this spring. It's great. It's really well marked now. I went with just me and my kids, and I actually let my 5-year-old lead us on the trails, and I only corrected her once. So it is extremely well marked, and the trails are a lot better maintained than they had been, even in the fall with all the drops. Like, it was pretty easy to figure out. So it's a great property, and I think getting people over there would be awesome. So I think at a minimum, if there's something from this, I think I'd like to bring up this concept a little bit more formally at the next Concom meeting, which is the 9th, about if the Concom would support trying to make a little bit more of an intentional connection between Shanda and Heron Point. Because then if I think they do, then at least that basis forms something that could eventually become a recommendation for consideration for the council to start doing something more intentional for that.
Another thing to consider, the town's looking at replacing the footbridge between, by the dam there. Is there anything that we can recommend or suggest, for them to look into while they're doing that, points of interest or something?
Why does that bridge need, I thought the bridge looked pretty good to me. I didn't.
I guess when they were, when they had the leakage there, and the shoreline there, they were looking at the bridge and found it deteriorating or something.
Do you want me to?
Yeah.
I have more info on this. So when the Bay Road force main, when the leak was discovered there, and the environmental services started to consider alternative routes for the force main to take, that's not replace in kind under the river, that's the next logical crossing to consider. And in doing so, we need to take a look at whether or not that could bear the load of hanging the sewer main on it. And doing the preliminary visual assessment, the abutments all look good, the general structure looks okay. It's the center stringer that's mostly showing the most deterioration at this point, and it's also 20 years old. So it's got a standard lifespan that's supposed to be about 50, but due to all the spray from the dam and the salt tidal condition, it's deteriorating a little faster than that. So we're going to need to replace it sooner than 50 years. We're still finishing up the non-destructive testing has been done, and we just need to get the results on that. That'll give us a general time frame of how long it's going to last. But we're looking at replacing that in the next probably 10 or so years.
Right, and so it makes sense to do it, at the same time you do that, you do the sewer main.
Right, it's still part of the evaluation for the route for the sewer main. It's still one of the top alternatives for taking that path. So the replacement of the bridge, or the replacement bridge, would incorporate a design for hanging the sewer off the side or underneath, and have that structural load accounted for in the replacement. Whether it goes that route or not, we're planning for it to be going that way at some point. Or having the option of doing that, whether it's the sewer main or a different utility that wants to take that path.
Yeah, and if you were within a few years of the life of one of them and the other one needed to be done right away, it probably would make sense to kind of,
work together,
They can
do 'em, yeah.
line up, yeah,
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay. No, thanks, Lindsay. That's
Yeah.
definitely helpful. Yeah, I mean, once the non-destructive stuff comes back, or if there's like any memo or report, it would be nice to know just generally like what the outcome is, if there is an imminent thing, or if it's more longer, medium
Yes,
horizon.
we're currently proceeding as if we will be putting forward an article for replacement of the bridge, assuming that once we have that more information, we'll have a better idea of timeline, and we could pull that article if we need to. But we know it needs to be replaced because we know it's deteriorating faster than it was anticipated. So we're kind of headed down that path, and we should have our memo and the analysis in the next few weeks, probably by mid-November, and I assume that will likely be reported through maybe the town manager's report to town council as an update on that.
Are there bridge materials, I mean, I don't galvanized or whatever, so that you could expect that you had more of a normal lifespan for the bridge once you...
Yes.
Yeah.
The replacement bridge will be different construction materials. It'll have a very similar look and feel, but it will be more appropriate for that environment. And we're also considering potentially a concrete deck that does not have the gaps that timber does, that would allow more of the melting and kind of dripping onto the stringers and support structure. So it would be more of an enclosed deck surface.
Take the service.
Yep.
So again, I was just thinking, is there anything that we can maybe recommend or suggest that, while we're doing that?
Cast concrete deck or finish it, you could put a pretty neat decal in it.
You could, yep. Or if you have a decal for what the trail is going to be, by the time we're doing that, there can be a placard or something that's
Yeah.
on either end of the bridge that helps with that wayfinding.
Yeah, the answer is yeah. It does, more so than trying to fit anything to an existing structure.
You know, is there any possibility that they might run the force main a different way? I.e.,
Yes?
take some land or get a right of way across the rock part there?
I'm not aware of any specifics on land taking, but the alternative routes that I'm aware of are the riverbed as a replace in kind, still go under the Lamprey River. Then there's the Bryant Rock, the McAllen Dam Bridge, I guess we'll call it. And then there's Route 108 is the next crossing, so it's at the Veterans Bridge. So that would be a further run, but it's kind of that up and around as the alternatives.
I've always had this idea of maybe something from like Bryant Rock, some kind of like a walkway along the riverside to the Heron Point deck there, along the waterfront, and so there's no plans to do anything like that. If they were doing something along that, maybe we could piggyback on top of that, a walkway
Potentially, I'm not aware of anything at this time.
like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. The bug in your ear.
Yeah.
So I think we can kind of, potentially a larger conversation for continuance, but I think for just right now, it seems like there's some general interest. So I'll bring it up with Concom, see if we can at least be kind of in agreement with them, because I think Shanda and Heron, obviously both conservation properties, it makes sense to kind of have them on board with that concept, but then maybe we can start packaging a little bit more of a formal concept for the town's consideration and potential implementation.
Yeah, one thing it seems to me that there's getting closer to being some urgency. Where are we on the charrette? Was that next fall? Now, do you know, if you talked with Bart to remember when he thought that charrette might happen?
Last I heard was pushed out, I believe it was in next year. I'm not sure if it was spring or fall.
I think spring, I think it was
Spring is-
supposed to,
I know it's been pushed a couple times.
I think it was
Yeah.
supposed to be like nowish, and they moved it to next spring. At least that's what I remember. Accuracy.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to have, and I don't know who could help us with that and what we need. It would be nice to at least, you know, I think one of the things we wanted to do between now and the charrette was to draw out some of these concepts. I think a lot of what we're talking now is what we'd like to be able to, you know, sort of sketch in some kind of way to the people as think of ways, you know, we might go out there.
Definitely. So I actually scratched like a 4E and a 4F onto mine. It's more things to mention high level, but I saw Bart for a minute at CONCOM on Thursday night, and I kind of knew he probably wasn't going to be here, so I didn't put him on because we would have just tabled him anyway. But one of them was, I think we had talked a while back about potentially having like a charrette scoping meeting with him, like one of these being that. Like, okay, these are the things what we want to talk about for this and all that. So I think we're probably coming up on that. Maybe that's sometime between November and like January or November and February. Again, can talk to Bart about it, but I think one of these meetings becomes sort of a charrette scoping discussion.
Yeah, it feels like it'd be great to do that in November in case it's going to take some time. And even if, you know, we're looking at this Veterans Day and looking at the meeting dates for next time, if we could kind of make sure, clear it on Bart's calendar to make sure he could come, might be worthwhile.
Yeah, I'll tell him that. I mean, I think we had kind of already settled on the 13th next time for the next meeting, because that would be second Monday, and also Veterans Day, I think, is observed on the Friday this year, on Friday the 10th, since the actual holiday is Thursday the 9th.
Yes, Friday the 10th is though.
So yeah, I think we had kind of talked about this high level or whatever, just to make sure we weren't immediately butting up against another
Yeah.
holiday.
So it'd be the 13th.
Yep.
Yeah. So it'd be nice to know if maybe we can get on if there's any conflicts with that at this point in time, because
Yeah, I can email him and just say, hey, we'd like to do this if it works with your schedule. Kind of on a similar, the item F that I had talked about was, I brought this up a while ago, but when we did that site walk in May and we kind of walked around back behind like the Creighton Street and stuff over to Young's Lane, that the town may already have, I guess, an easement to cross that little bit of private property on the
Genie
riverfront.
property?
Yeah, there's whatever that frontage is, 20 to 50 feet, not long. But that by nature of the town having an easement, a right-of-way into the Creighton Street pump station, that theoretically there may already be a way of access that would then allow the Riverwalk to ever extend further south. So that barrier may or may not actually exist. But that comes with somebody weighing in on a reading of a deed, which is not me. Because I don't know anything about that, so I can't weigh in on if the town has it a right of way that would support that, or frankly, if the town wants that. Because it would effectively route people into that Creighton Street property to do so. I know there's some plans to change septage up to the plant, so I don't know if that changes form and function of that facility or its overall criticality to you, but any extension of the Riverwalk south really does go through that property and then brings people closer to the wastewater plant, which I know also may not be incredibly desirable for you guys.
No, I think as long as there can be some level of security of that infrastructure maintained, that would be worth discussing.
Yeah, I mean, even if you wanted to keep a fence and it could just pull in, I mean, you
Yeah.
don't have to have people like with huge RVs 3-point turning down there once septage leaves. So
Right.
I guess like the function changes a little bit. But yeah, do you know at all kind of what we're talking about? I don't know how much.
I don't know the specific piece of property in terms of looking at the land out there to see
Yeah.
where it is. But I know Sean has mentioned that there is that little piece that's privately owned that would be the little connector.
It basically, right now, it stops because there's like Shanda Park up here and then that Creighton Street pump station thing's here, and there's technically a little private land here, but Creighton Street itself, actually, into that, there's an easement on that property for the town to access that pump station. So basically, you could skip that if you moved people through the actual pump station lot, depending on the language of that easement. And that's always why the Riverwalk has never been able to extend further south, because even past that thing, the town, I think, actually owns that whole parcel directly between Young's Lane and like Creighton Street as well.
Yes.
So
With
it's
the
like,
exception of the little fish and game piece in between DPW and
Yep.
the wastewater treatment plant, yeah.
so it's like technically you could bring people all the way back through that, all the way to like Young's Lane, New Road, you know, again, if you really wanted to, or if you wanted to make it clear where people could or couldn't go.
I think it would be nice if we could extend it down to the south.
Yeah. It'd open it up more, more frontage.
It's almost like a Heron Point sized,
It's pretty big back there.
it's pretty big by the time you get down to the Fish and Game land. We have an extensive amount of riverfront. And, you know, the riverfront is much bigger than most people, and certainly I did when we started this project.
Yeah.
There's a lot more of it than I realized. And, you know, even if you don't build a pedestrian bridge, or if you do either way, to be able to walk from Heron Point around to the other shore allows for a lot of
Yeah.
access by the public, and it's, most of it, and a lot of it's in a fairly, you know, close to the downtown, which is nice in terms of being able to have it be used and kind of monitored and stuff like that. I think that it's worth doing an inventory and having a discussion about what it would take to develop different parts of that town, because I think there's a lot of people that use the various parts of it, and a lot more would if you started to, you know, get it on the web and put signage up and stuff like that. I think it would be a real
Yeah,
feature.
it could be. Okay. I guess trying to call it back to the agenda, unless anyone has anything else they want to say about kind of Riverwalk stuff right now. There was a meeting last month that I got invited to, but Steve had gotten some of the committee chairs on just a short Zoom call to go over just some high-level stuff about how to run committees in public notification and what we can and can't do, and meeting terms and things like that. It was just a nice refresher, especially being on like a volunteer committee and not having any knowledge of any of that stuff. It was nice to hear it again. But one thing that I did see that came up from that was the concept of like email correspondence. Like we're not going to get town emails because we're not, I mean, you have one because you're on town council, which makes sense, but they don't give them to like individual committee members. So there's just some talk about limitations of like freedom of information requests and things like that. And it was recommended that you either use like a Gmail or a Yahoo email address for correspondence, like stuff like this, which I think everyone but me does. So it may be more of a comment to me, but I just thought I would bring it up because it seemed like having a public domain email with like an @Gmail and @Yahoo was the best substitute if we don't have a town issued email for correspondence related to committee work.
Yeah, are you saying any Gmail is good? Like my personal email is a Gmail, or do we set up a new and distinct Gmail for this purpose?
I think either is fine. That was how I interpreted the conversation. It's just so like for me, like I monitor like my work email way more than any other email. So I've been doing some correspondence through that, but I think there's just, if someone asks something, it then technically moves outside like a public domain and into like my company's stuff.
I think the suggestion is set up a separate email just for this committee, because if you do get a right to know request and you're using your personal email, then potentially, they could ask for other stuff that you have within your personal email, so.
Yeah.
It keeps it all nice and neat.
Yeah.
If something does come up, you just go to one place and there's all the emails. That's
Yeah.
the suggestion.
Thank you.
So-
I did recently, just in the last month or so, have some school board requests, and I haven't been on the school board since 2019.
Yeah.
You let me guess.
Yeah. So I think that's something, I think it's been extremely low risk to date because we've really been talking like concept stuff, but probably within the next year or so, we're going to start talking about things that may be things and may be things that some people don't like. So if we want to create like separate email addresses or something, I think the Arts and Tourism Committee person said they all made one that was just like Arts and Tourism 1 at Arts and Tourism 2 at like something like that. So just a way to kind of make it incredibly clear, even if it was just
Right.
SK Riverfront at Newmarket. Or I don't know, I'm not great
Yeah.
at names, but you get the picture. Something that's kind of more dedicated for this and more clearly for use of this, so that it doesn't open up other avenues for requests if there was ever an information request in the future.
So are you going to be doing that for you?
I think so. Yeah, I can try to make one and then say like, this is the name I made. Yeah, maybe make
Yeah,
a
it should be
format.
uniform,
Yeah.
absolutely.
All right. I'll try to think of something better than whatever nonsense I just said.
Fancy for me, but
I'll make a Gmail address and then just say what like format I used, and then everyone else can kind of
yeah, sounds good.
do one similar. Something we had talked about a while back, I honestly do not exactly remember when, but we talked about potentially reapproaching some of the team members from the Great Bay Living Shoreline project that helped kind of frame out some of the concept design stuff for Shanda. I did drop an email to DES, and their response was basically, yeah, no, we'd be happy to chat and re-engage with the town on something. I think especially if we're going to potentially invite Bart like next month or whatever, probably a little bit more out. I'm not 100% sure exactly what we're asking, but DS has at least offered that, yes, we'd provide input or put specific questions back to members on the project team or whatever if there was something, but they have at least extended that offer that if we want to talk to them again in the future, we absolutely can do that.
Seems like to me the number one thing is how would it have changed our, some of the concept and feedback we've been, it's been very valuable the way it is, because we've constantly looked back at not only the design, but comments they made. A lot of it had to do with, stormwater, the parking lot. They were always concerned, about how nitrogen could come right down the street in there. A lot of, we talked about the boat landing a lot with them. So I think we felt like we were trying to get the living shoreline concept in that little space.
Yeah.
It was limiting what we could do because we didn't have, you're trying to fit a living shoreline in there, and we do not want to shrink the park, and we do, we had a lot of recreational use. Now, the boat landing could be, all of that stuff was talked about, but we did that in the context of having limited the area that we were going to talk about to that, this side of the pump station. None of that other stuff was included in that at all. And I think the question is, should some of the living shoreline, where we feature the living shoreline, is that the best place for it? Because, should we have a conversation that talks about some of those other locations?
Yeah, I want to, so I had, after hearing some of the feedback and some of the questions about the location of a living shoreline at Shanda Park. I had a conversation with Sean about potentially putting the living shoreline along the Creighton Street pump station, because that shoreline actually does need some rehab currently and does not see the same foot traffic, but has the same visibility. So that section of shoreline may be a better visible location to highlight an opportunity to do it that doesn't detract from any of the current uses that are pretty valuable in Shanda Park. So as you start having more conversations with DES, can you keep me in the loop on that? Because we've had some
You think you are a star.
tangent conversations
Is
on
there,
that too.
is there any sort of, like timeline? Is it like falling apart and needs something imminent, or is it just, man, we should probably do something? I'm just trying to
it's
think
going.
of horizons.
And there's also discussion about some potential pump station rehab work that needs to happen. So kind of, it's not urgent to do the shoreline, but as we're looking at the bigger picture, once subject receiving is relocated and we can kind of do some of the potential upgrade or rehab that needs to happen at the pump station, we can incorporate living shoreline with that work all at once.
Good. I ask, in your concept, would there be like a little, potentially area for a little walkway between the pump station and the living shoreline?
Yeah, that was something that we did talk about,
Cool.
opportunity to kind of pull the fence in, because you don't want people walking on a living shoreline, you want them to
Yeah,
see it.
right.
You want them to get near it and have a kiosk, and we could locate a kiosk that's kind of right at the edge of the fence. So then the pump station is isolated and the living shoreline extends along that area and people can get up to it, read about it, learn about it, but not be walking on it.
Excellent, yeah.
Some of it does go back nicely to that Pierce Island concept of the way, maybe you could make it a little less industrial looking than they did at Pierce Island. But the idea you're clearly constrained to the walkway. You've got to walk around in that path, but you can see
Right.
both sides very well, and that would really fit.
Yeah, so that very general concept is something that Sean and I talked about already, so it's kind of
I like it.
an
I
avenue that
really
we could
do.
take.
It's sort of
Yeah.
like the new bridge is that if you can find numerous reasons to do the same thing, that really strengthens.
And you get broader support for
Yep.
something like that too.
Yeah, Got Sean on board to touch his stuff. That's pretty good.
So far, he's okay with the idea.
So I guess without understanding timelines or how far in some of these conversations are, I think there's a lot of potential discussion with that, because if it's something the town's already looking at, there's obviously way more room by the Creighton Street pump station than in Shanda Park, especially if it's still, A, is visible from Shanda Park, and B, if there's any way to combine it with that concept of extending the Riverwalk anyway and letting people access that property. Like, there really may be like a symbiosis there.
Yeah.
I don't know how imminent any of this stuff is. Do you want us to talk? I mean,
I would say it's not imminent in that we're trying to put together any official concepts. I
Yeah.
think floating the ideas and starting to get stakeholders on board with the general approach. And as we move forward with the master plan process and we're identifying the key elements of improvements for the Shanda Park area or Riverfront as a whole, that the living shoreline is definitely one of them already. I think teasing out an ideal location or a couple of alternative locations that can help narrow down how it fits with other uses and other projects, then we can kind of talk more about a timeline of when that work fits in and if that is contingent upon any other pieces or elements that would be needing to get constructed as well.
Would you say that it probably would make sense to try to have, do you think it's going to be possible to have, the charrette work happening, say, next spring or possibly fall, wherever that's happening, to try to have some broad concept of these are possibilities that, as we develop the riverfront, we try to be ready for that, and maybe would that make sense?
I would think that would be helpful, because even if it's just a really thick line or like a highlight of an area. Little bubbles, this is here, this is here. We know stormwater treatment at the park, we know living shoreline, we know culvert replacement, we know the connectivity and the walking path. Having just these little dots of things and their proximity to each other is also helpful in terms of thinking about constructability in the future too. You don't want to do something here and then find out you needed something here, but you got to go through that to get there.
I'm inclined to maybe reach back out to DES and potentially invite them to like a December meeting. But ask if they could do, they on DES, because back when this conversation started, like, Kristen Howard had been extremely helpful. I think she even did like a site screening sheet for us for Shanda Park for living shoreline and all that. I can ask DES if they can maybe just do again extreme high level poke on their side, and also maybe talk to some of the Great Bay living shoreline team folks if effectively if we slid it from Shanda Park into more of the Creighton Street pump station area, if they thought it fundamentally changed anything they said or recommended, give them a little time, maybe see if we can kind of understand if that's equally viable site. I kind of think that it is, just looking at their past work and screening tools, but that may give them a little time to work on that, and then we can have a little bit more formal discussion on what that would look like. But I like that a lot. I like that idea a lot. Okay. On to old stuff, not to make you sit back down, but now it would be the Moonlight Brook. Yeah, Moonlight Brook stuff.
Okay. There's not a, I guess, more immediate update. We had a conversation about Moonlight Brook and some of the work that the Lamprey River Advisory Committee is doing with their sampling. I actually had some follow-up with Steve Jones, and he is likely going to be back out to do the sampling in the upper watershed within the next 2 weeks. He will be parking in front of your house.
Perfect. I'll keep an eye out for him.
So there is that ongoing sampling effort that is still being coordinated by the Lamprey River Advisory Committee, and UNH is doing the active monitoring on that. In terms of town investigation in Moonlight Brook, building upon that sampling effort and that monitoring, I prepared a pre-application to DES for Clean Water SRF funding for a stormwater planning project to do some additional sampling and investigation more specific to the stormwater infrastructure within the watershed, so we can kind of identify if there's anything in our system that shouldn't be in our system and work towards removing that stuff, because it's also MS4 compliance requirements, and we need to be doing that. So with that project, we just got word, congratulatory letter from DES that it was selected for funding. So we are going to move ahead with the, I prepared an article, so that'll be to town vote to get the authority to borrow, because it's a loan with principal forgiveness. So we need the town vote authority to borrow to move ahead with that. And then, and in the meantime, between now and March, we'll be working on coordination with a consultant to get a consultant on board and following up the Clean Water SRF requirements for procurement and everything like that, so that we can get somebody working on developing a more formal scope, because it was kind of a very broad-based, these are the things we'd like to do, and now we need to talk to an engineering consultant that's going to help support and execute a lot of the sampling and analysis through that. So that is moving forward. And I think that will, I'm not sure if the Lamprey River Advisory Committee is going to be continuing to do the monitoring next year. I imagine that they're going to continue with this annually through the summer times. So we will likely want to continue, stay in the loop and keep coordinating with them for next summer and see if we can use a lot of that data as the basis for what we're going to put together with our SRF scope.
when I talked to Suzanne Peterson back in midsummer or something, she contacted me about the whole sign issue and stuff. And she said that Steve Jones needed more funding then. Do you know if he got more funding to do it next year or?
I don't know the answer to that. I know he needed more funding to do the upper watershed piece of it, and they did provide the funding for that, and that's the piece the new ad that he's gonna be doing in the coming weeks.
So that's, I get, and she also mentioned to me that you attended their July meeting, so it must have been after that, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Can you give us just a general idea of what you have in mind for the scope for,
For the stormwater planning?
yeah?
Yeah, it's primarily focused on the investigation of the stormwater infrastructure. So it'll be outfall sampling,
Oh, okay.
and then for areas, outfalls that have a hit or visual indicators of an illicit discharge, then we'll work through the catchment investigation procedure to look at various structures moving from the outfall upstream within the stormwater system. And we have a handful of outfalls. I want to say we have like 6 or 7 that we already have identified and mapped, but we don't necessarily have a lot of information about the pipe networks that lead to them. So that's going to be the bulk of the work,
Okay, so it's kind of like the
that.
infrastructure, the stuff going into it. It's
Right.
got nothing to do with the actual
Not so much with the stream. That's kind of the Lamprey River Advisory Committee, and UNH is kind of focusing on the stream piece of it, and we're going to take a closer look at our discharges to the stream to make sure that we can identify if there's any corrective measures we need to take.
Okay, cool. Great.
So, yeah, I'm obviously not great at stormwater, as you probably know, but this is like the IDD stuff, is that what it
Yes.
is? Like illicit discharge connection stuff?
Yep.
How specifically does it tie into any potential plan for like Moonlight Brook? Do we still need to eventually do like a true H&H study to figure out what a replacement looks like there?
For the culverts?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And that study will be better informed once we've done the investigation to determine what kind of systems we have discharging to it.
Okay.
And an understanding of, do we have 5 outfalls or do we have 13 outfalls?
Yeah.
That changes the hydrology or the hydraulics through there significantly.
Okay, awesome. That's the link that I don't understand, so, okay.
And still the H&H will also look at, how much has the flood risks changed since the new road work
Yes.
and all that? That's still part of
Yep.
that out there.
Okay. Yeah, no, awesome. Sounds great.
So just to anticipate the question, general timeline on that is we wouldn't be ready to proceed with that project and have our agreement with DES in place until probably this time next year. And I say that because we did a pre-application or a full application for a similar type project looking at Moody Point stormwater management. That was an article in March of this year, and we just this afternoon received our loan agreement approved and fully executed from Governor and Council. So we'll probably be looking at starting the Moonlight Brook stormwater planning project around this time next year. If we can go any faster, we'll move it faster. It just takes time.
Yeah.
Hey, making progress, or at least getting somewhere finally. It's taken like 2 years of talk, at least see a light at the end of the tunnel now. At least something's happening.
Can we talk about 4C at this point? Easily, that's the signage, it's so closely related.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you may know more than I. I think I just
I did.
added it more on the fact that I think a lot of people are talking about it, and I have largely stayed out of that conversation.
I did
So,
talk to Bart about it a couple of weeks
Okay.
ago, so he said he was going to, who was he going to talk to? I don't know. But he was going to call Ellen. He planned to talk to Ellen to see, you know, I think he wanted to work with her and further develop the signage, because the idea is that I think Bart and I see the whole thing as it developed with LRAC and the letter and all of that. We see it the same way, and I won't go into that, but I think the idea of having better signage there, over to the point where we get to do some of this work, you know, having some signage up on the kiosk, having some kind of warning there. I think when Bart and I talked about it, you know, we say, you know, it's not like a legal requirement that town do it, but it's the right thing to do, and there's an opportunity for education mixed in there.
Yeah.
So you can inform people of, you know, some of what you're working on could be mentioned in there. You know, inform people that from what we know now, you know, it's not a good place for people to be down there trying to play in the brook or anything like that. So some specific warning telling people not to do that. We can talk about why we don't feed the ducks, because in my mind, and I'd be interested in your comments on that, the testing to date, the Moonlight Brook situation was a human DNA kind of contamination. And the kind of DNA, the kind of fecal bacteria contamination we have at the boat landing that was done there didn't involve any DNA testing, so it could just be ducks. And it could be, because there's such a occluded culvert situation there, in the bacteria situation from one to the other may be different etiologies.
Yes, likely very different. And then from what I know of the monitoring that's been done this year, bacteria counts everywhere have been very high because of the weather that we've gotten this summer. But also the DNA tracing hasn't been completed for this round. So although we know the bacteria counts are very high, they don't have the breakdown yet on the sources and potential sources, although knowing that the counts are high everywhere and it's likely due to stormwater, there will probably be higher indicators from waterfowl, from dogs, from other things that typically come with that surface runoff. So it'll be interesting to see what that actually shows when that comes out.
Yeah.
Well, I think, you know, Bart sounded like he was going to take a first stab at it with, as I understand what, you know, it was just a brief conversation. He was going to take a brief stab at it with Ellen, and he thought that she would be a great person to work with on that.
Yeah. It's basically on here because I know it's something that we've talked about briefly. I am convinced that others are pretty well engaged. There's a lot of discussion on it and there is action. So kind of deferring to Bart and the town's lead on it. But just, yeah, more acknowledging and closing a discussion that's been brought up a couple times.
I also can add that I think there are sort of two different signage discussions happening. There's the educational and what everyone can do to reduce the amount of bacteria pollutant load in that area. And then there's also the public health perspective and warning piece of it. I'm not sure if the signs need to be very tied together or one could be separate from the other so that there is something that warns of the public health risk and then a more educational informative sign that talks about some of those various sources. So there are those two discussions happening, and I know that Bart and our health officer have been having more discussions about the public health piece of it that I think seems to be a little bit more of an urgent push in discussions in general. So there is that, and we've got some reference information from a similar watershed in Rye, where they have a watershed, a full watershed-based management plan to address bacteria and failing septic systems, and they have some various warning signs that they put out and monitoring that they do. So we've been able to look to them for some guidance on how they handle it too.
You know, the other thing I thought, and I think this is after I talked to Bart, or I might have mentioned this to Bart too, I think, to some extent, you know, I thought in the newsletter, the LRAC newsletter that came out language about the question of, because a lot of people, and that was another thing I observed one day, was watching people trying to come up, and there were like 4 women in kayaks, and one of them was trying very hard to climb out on the town dock, and it was a struggle, as it would be for somebody in my age group, and and other people were getting out and waiting, and you could tell that they were having a conversation, and when I talked to Suzanne Peterson, she talked about, people ask a lot about the safety of that.
Mhm.
And that's a tricky conversation right now. They had what's going on down in Long Island Sound in Connecticut. They had vibrio deaths this year from people that were, you get warm salt water, and it may not be, and this is not really related to contamination issues.
Right.
It's just a different issue. So everybody has to, I think there's going back to Betsy's comment on the QR code, there could be the opportunity to have some that will fit on a kiosk, and some just sort of general things to be aware of. And, people that have open wounds, and people that are highly immune compromised may look for more specific guidance or be aware of the weather, or something about that. Just, I don't know how much of it has to go in there, but there's a, you get a rating on a river, is it safe to swim or not safe to swim? But there's a lot of complexity going on in all of it.
Yeah.
And I do think in terms of processing information, people have gotten so text-oriented that if you try to combine all of that, it gets too long and they read the top and not the bottom.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes. Condensed messaging.
A lot of times too, because we're looking at, bacterial contamination, I mean, that qualifies as biohazardous, so you look at your signage and use that standard orange, background, and then your black writing, that draws people's eye to it as well. Just a thought for signage.
Yeah, well, I think you have to have some sensitivity is what's going on. It's not that this is an unusually contaminated site in a lot of ways. As your point, there's a lot of places that are dealing with similar issues, but it is a good place to put some things that acquaint people with, don't feed the ducks if you don't want, and the idea of if you have concerns, it could be different if you have wounds, and if it's been really warm lately. These are some things that are true in lots of places.
The difficulty too is, there is a sign right at the boat ramp that says, "Don't feed the ducks."
Mhm.
And yet there's a woman that goes down there every day with a half to a full bag of breadcrumbs and feeds the duck. And I happen to have been walking along the river and saw her. And I said, "You do realize you're not supposed to feed the ducks? I mean, it's against the town ordinance." And she looked at me like I had 5 heads, and I said, "Turn around and read the sign behind you." And, just oblivious. And so you could have all the signage, but there's also got to be a
Did
way
it
of
change her?
educating and enforce. No, she just emptied the rest of the bag and walked away.
Again, or-
Oh yeah, see her down there all the time. So, but how do you enforce that? I mean, I know in some communities, and I don't know the ordinance in Newmarket, but some communities there's a $200 fine for feeding a waterfowl. In Derry they had a huge problem with people feeding ducks at a town park, and that
Well, yeah,
there was a fineage for it. Yeah.
I agree with, I think if we have an ordinance, I mean, I think sometimes these are hard things to enforce, because people come there with their kids, and what policeman wants to walk up and say, here's a $200 ticket for having your kids here to feed the duck. I get it, but we may have to, it could come up be brought up at a town council meeting, and actually talk with the police about issuing warnings to start with, and making some, make people aware of what the penalty is. I mean, I think you have to have, just in support of Betsy, if she goes up and gets kind of blown off when she tells somebody there's an ordinance, if people understand that there is an ordinance and this is the penalty, and it's important because of these issues.
And a lot of times people will let their young children wade, in that boat ramp, and, and that's exactly where all the ducks congregate, and
Right, I get that.
Yeah.
I think there is plenty of opportunity for starting to bring out the
Yeah.
issues a little bit more.
I think the town has potentially started enforcing parking down there a little bit more. I feel like I've seen somebody like come take a couple loops, and it might just be like, hey, maybe you just look to see if somebody's actively feeding the waterfowl and say like, please don't do that. Like, I don't know, but I feel like I've actually seen the town attempt to police those parking spaces a little bit better, because there's a lot of folks that I think are parked there that aren't really using the park.
Yeah, the increased enforcement there is with the new parking enforcement officer and
Yeah.
the focus on paying attention to parking downtown. So
Yeah.
there is more going on. I don't know if he could also just kind of pay attention to that. I'm not sure
Yeah. I
on
don't-
his level of
I don't either.
authority to enforce, but
Well, maybe it's a question for the police. Is there ever,
probably is a question for the police chief.
right,
Yeah.
and for Joe too, just to look and see, is there any penalty? If the sign doesn't say what the penalty is, but it does it?
No, it just,
Yeah.
It also doesn't say for exclusive use of Shanta Park only. It just says no parking from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any way to say that parking is exclusively.
Yeah, I don't know if it is either.
But how can you, if you have somebody that's monitoring the parking, making sure that only people who are parking there are using for Shanta Park? Do you know what I'm saying, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
'cause I
if
think-
you had a problem where people are using it that are working in the downtown, if that's a
Right.
problem, you could
Yeah.
put a 2-hour limit on that.
Right.
So that would be worth some examination of how you try to separate that for,
Mhm.
that becomes sort of like on-street parking. They have to do things to try to keep, and, you know, make it clear to people, I mean, that it isn't, the alternatives are good, they can park on Bay Road, they can park at, over by the railroad street, and stuff like that. It's not a lot further, but that's not the place, that's not there for employee parking.
I chuckled when I saw him with his long chalk writer. I thought, gee, I'm of an age where teachers had to have long chalk writers because we wrote on chalkboards. I'm going, oh, somebody besides the teacher uses a long chalk writer.
But on the other hand, though, too, if we're starting to develop that whole area for recreation, you know, if people decide to come down there and they want to walk, you know, over to Heron Park, and then they're going to come back, and then they're going to have lunch, is a 2-hour, or have dinner, is a 2-hour limitation feasible? You know, that's the other thing that we have
Yeah,
to
it may not be.
think about as well. I can see no 8 hours, but certainly, you know, think about that as well, so.
Yeah.
And how much of it is used when the food pantry is open and people park there so they can go to the food pantry?
Yeah, that's a good point, too.
On the duck thing, there is a fine up to $50. And if they don't pay it within 30 days, it can be up to $1,000.
On feeding the ducks.
And it can be issued by any law enforcement officer, health officer, or the town manager. It's Steve out there.
Yeah. Get them a lawn chair. You can sit out there for a day.
Well, a good start is just education, you know?
Yeah.
And even if it's, you know, volunteers, Conservation Commission, you know, going down there on a day, you know, just kind of maybe speaking to people, giving flyers.
Thanks, Joe, that's good though. I mean, I think even on not to have more than just a sign, but to have the language, if you don't put it on the sign, put it on the kiosk. This is the penalty, and, you know, could have when the signage goes up, I think there would be a good opportunity, need somebody to make public comment at the town council, I'd be happy to do that. Just saying, these are not things anybody wants to enforce, but they're important because there are multiple users there, and feeding ducks, you know, it's never good to feed wildlife, but this is certainly not the place where you're attracting and fouling the waters where other people are using it to volunteer.
And the other thing is, if raccoons are nocturnal, and we might not see raccoons, and raccoons are really dangerous carriers of all sorts of nasty stuff. And they might be there at night when we wouldn't see them because we're looking for all the leftovers from the ducks.
There's lots of good reasons not to.
There's been an increase in the number of ducks as well in the last couple of years. And, you know, a lot of them are having multiple, I don't know, batches, I guess is the best way. I mean, you know, there's some that are having like 2 and 3. So, you know, you're usually looking at 10 to 12 ducklings. They don't all survive, but all you need is just another female, a couple males, and,
Yeah.
you've got another.
Keeps up, we'll have geese up in there, we had geese broods.
Yeah.
Didn't used to see them, but there were geese broods in the river this last year. So, anyways, I think we
Yeah.
covered it. but-
Yeah, no, it is kind of funny, like in the
Recording
general
in
scheme of
progress.
things. It's not like the biggest issue the town faces, but it is starting to kind of snowball a little bit and kind of causing some multifaceted issues down there. So, I think the last kind of major topic that I had was just some update on the master plan stuff. Again, mostly just what I have heard. So it seems like what Bart had kind of presented on Thursday night was that the town is kind of obviously starting that process, and I think the open space chapter is potentially first up. So they're looking at having a draft of that in like December of that chapter. I had kind of asked him about, where Riverfront would fit in, and he had kind of seen that, we may be sprinkled between the open space, recreation, and community facilities chapters. So I guess another plug, if anyone is interested, it still seems like they're seeking input or additional people to be involved in that master planning process. I think we talked about this briefly in August. I know none of us exactly jumped at the opportunity. I'm bringing it up more so again, just, Betsy, you're new as well. I don't think you heard that one in August. I don't remember you being there, so I don't know if you have a strong desire to be involved with it. We can obviously read the draft of it and offer some sort of input, so we always have a check there. But if anyone wants to take a more active role in any of the master planning stuff, I think there is an active committee that BART is still seeking additional committee members and or just members of the public on to provide something.
When I talked to him a couple of weeks ago, he seemed to indicate he would really like to see us have a member on there and like to come
Yeah.
up with that. So I think we should do that. I said before.
I agree.
August I would be willing, but if somebody else really wants to do it, I won't feel bad.
So I'll just add that the town is contracted with Stratford Regional Planning to do the development of the master plan. So you don't have to actually do a whole lot of writing. It's more you provide input for them to put it all
Yeah.
together for you.
Yep. Yeah, no, and that's a helpful distinction, yeah. Like, you don't have to author a master plan, you just have to provide input. If no one's dying to take it on, I think that would be fantastic. I think it'd be great for us to have a seat at the table. It's just not something I can personally offer
What are
either.
the meeting dates and times? That's,
I don't know, we would have to coordinate that.
I asked that question before.
I
When
know.
I was talking about it.
it must be on the town website.
I think it is an actual committee now, so maybe it's more defined.
That I don't know.
I'm not sure if the
Yeah.
committee's been formally or officially formed yet.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, back in August, I don't think that info existed, but it seemed like it might be kind of closer to being a real thing, so that might tell you frequency.
Okay.
Yeah,
Time.
If the information isn't out, it's imminent.
Okay.
So we can also kind of table it. That couldn't be an offline discussion to, if that information becomes available or more clear, like if there's an interest for you to do it depending on date and time and whatever. I think we can make that. I think it would be great if someone could be a part of it. I'm just not gonna delegate that. I unfortunately can't offer my time for it, and I don't want to force someone into it. So. Outside of that, I just put town survey results on here too. I don't think those are ready yet. But how's it going?
Wrong meeting.
Could be the right meeting. You never know.
Let's get out there.
I just put down survey results. I don't know. Were you involved in any of that, or was it really just kind of barring them? Probably more of a question for him, but just I doubt they're available yet. But I think that process has been completed, and if they're not available, I was just curious what timeline they may be. That's all I had. Anyone have anything else they want to discuss? I think just high level action items. I'll email Bart and see if he can come for November, for kind of a more charrette scoping specific meeting. Look at making a Gmail address. I'll reach out to DES about our concept of the Creighton Street stuff, see if maybe they can come in December as well. Get them kind of lined up for that. And I'll kind of talk about the community trail concept more officially with Concom at the next meeting. See if that's something they'll be interested in and support as well.
Has the Concom heard any of the discussion about from the pump station and the shoreline stuff? Is that gone?
That's the first I've heard of it. Would you prefer we don't keep talking about it? I don't know. I don't know with stuff that's preliminary how much we want to hang our hats on something, or if it's okay to say, hey, this is a concept we're going
I
to
think
keep
it's okay
kind
to
of talking
say
about.
this is an alternative location, because I think if it turns out that would be a better spot than what was considered before, then we'll probably move towards doing that.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would have an issue with it. I mean, not speaking for anyone, but like, I think getting a living shoreline is kind of interesting and of interest more than the specific location. I think what drew DES's eyes a little bit earlier was in the process was just that Shanda was sort of a new, unique spot with it being sort of urbanized. I mean, I think the further you slide down the shore, the more you lose that uniqueness aspect of it. But at the same time, if it's a better product and it gets the project done, I don't know. Yeah.
It's not far from-
Especially if as part of potentially a pump station rehab or with septage moving away, if you could shrink the fence line, make it part of the river walk and still get that education community engagement part, then functionally nothing has changed.
Right. I think it could be sold to them.
Yeah.
It's definitely not something that needs to, since Sean and I have had the discussion and he's comfortable with the idea of it, better to find out sooner if anybody else is opposed to the
Yeah.
idea.
Agreed.
Sounds good.
Yeah. I'll couch it more in just, high level concept of an alternate location in
Yeah.
concert with a pump station rehab and potentially just,
There's no actual design
Yeah.
or anything that's gone forward. It's an idea and feedback is welcome.
works.
It's great to have a lot of these ideas, getting a
It
little
is.
more real and firmed up in terms of at least having been talking about it, to give us topics for the charrette. I think
Yeah.
that really works well.
Agreed. Well, thank you, everyone. So the next meeting would be Monday, the 13th, 4 o'clock. Excellent. See you guys then.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, motion to adjourn.
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah, thank you. Not good at procedure.